Black waitress deliberately spilled coffee on the billionaire CEO. He froze when he found out why. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's incredible tale. You won't want to miss what happens next. It's a story about a billionaire, a waitress, and a shocking turn of events that no one could have seen coming. Picture this. It's a luxurious afternoon in one of the most exclusive restaurants in New York City, the kind of place where the lights shimmer off golden chandeliers and the air smells faintly of expensive wine. The wealthy patrons lounge in their tailored suits, laughing and talking business deals. Amidst them, working quietly, is Jessica, a young black waitress with sharp eyes and a quiet strength. She's been here for months, learning the ropes, navigating the unspoken rules of service, blending into the background, doing her job without drawing attention. But today was different. As she walks through the dining area, carefully balancing a tray of steaming cups of coffee, she notices him, Derek Weston, the CEO of Weston Technologies, a man known for his ruthless business tactics and towering presence. His reputation precedes him, and everyone in the room knows who he is. Derek is seated at a table near the back, talking with a group of investors. His voice is loud and commanding, effortlessly cutting through the room's quiet hum. Jessica has served him before, but today something feels off. As she approaches his table, Derek notices her. His eyes flicker briefly, sizing her up, and with a smirk, he says something under his breath. Let's see if she gets it right this time, he mutters, loud enough for everyone to hear. Jessica's hand tightens around the coffee tray, but she says nothing. She knows better than to react. It's part of the job. But in that moment, something shifts inside her. As she sets down the coffee in front of him, Derek leans back in his chair, glancing down at the cup with disdain. Did you even bother to check the temperature? He sneers, loud enough for the whole table to hear. The room falls silent for a brief moment as the words hang in the air. Jessica stands still, the heat of the coffee in her hand, her mind racing. The humiliation of it all feels too much to bear. She knows she should just walk away, keep her head down. But instead, she looks up, meeting his eyes. A slow smile plays at the corners of her mouth, a quiet defiance in her gaze. Without saying a word, she takes a step back, lifting the coffee pot one more time. Then, deliberately, with perfect aim, she tips the pot, spilling the hot coffee straight onto his lap. The room freezes. Gasps ripple through the crowd as Derek's eyes widen in shock. His face turns bright red as the liquid soaks through his expensive suit. He opens his mouth to speak, but no words come out. The room waits in suspended silence, waiting for his reaction. Everyone is watching now. What happened next, however, was something no one expected. Derek doesn't shout. He doesn't explode in anger. Instead, he sits there, stunned, dripping coffee all over his lap, unable to process what just happened. Jessica stands there, unmoving, as the seconds stretch on. And in those long moments of silence, Derek realizes something. This wasn't just an accident. This wasn't just a mistake. Jessica had done this on purpose. And when the realization hits him, it's like a slap to the face. What he doesn't know, what no one in that room realizes, is the reason behind her actions. The reason why she chose this moment to stand up for herself, to take control of the situation. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about something deeper, something that had been building up for a long time. Derek's shock isn't just about the coffee. It's about the realization that the person he's been dismissing, the person he thought was invisible, has now made him the one who's truly powerless. Stay tuned, because what happens next will change everything. The room was still as Derek sat frozen, his hand hovering over his lap, not sure whether to move or not. The coffee had splashed onto his expensive suit, staining the fabric and leaving a mark that he knew would never come out. His mind raced, but he couldn't process what had just happened. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone was waiting for him to react, but Derek was speechless. He looked up at Jessica, the waitress who had spilled the coffee deliberately, but all he could see was the calmness in her eyes. Her face showed no remorse, no fear, just a quiet strength. Jessica had done this on purpose. And she wasn't apologizing. She wasn't backing down. That moment, Derek realized, was more than just about coffee or a mistake. It was about power, respect, and something far deeper. The hum of whispers started to rise around the room, and Derek's face grew darker, but not from rage. It was something else, embarrassment. How could he, a billionaire CEO who had climbed to the top of his game, be outdone by a waitress in this way? He had always been the one in control, the one people listened to. Yet here he was, the one who had just been humiliated in front of everyone. Slowly, Derek stood up, wiping the coffee off his pants, still trying to come to terms with the reality of what had just happened. Jessica didn't say a word. She didn't offer any help. She simply stood there, watching him. "You've got guts," Derek finally muttered, his voice low and strained. Jessica gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind of smile that showed no fear. "You think I'm afraid of you?" she said quietly, her voice steady but firm. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, and it cut through the air like a blade. Derek's eyes widened. He had expected her to apologize, to fall into the role of the subservient, apologetic waitress who had made a mistake. But she wasn't playing by his rules. She wasn't giving him the satisfaction of seeing her cower. That realization hit Derek harder than the coffee had. He knew in that moment that he had underestimated her. And that was a mistake he would regret. The rest of the room had fallen into an uneasy silence, the guests unsure of how to react. Derek's arrogance had always commanded attention, but now it seemed that the tables had turned. His own discomfort was palpable. For the first time in his life, he was the one being judged. "I don't know who you think you are," Derek said, his voice now more measured, trying to regain some sense of authority. "But this is not how things work around here." Jessica stepped back slightly, maintaining her calm demeanor. She wasn't intimidated. "You're right," she said, her voice still even. "Things don't work the way you think they do." There was a pause, and for a brief second, Derek saw something in her eyes, something that made him question everything he had ever known about power and respect. Jessica wasn't just a waitress. She was something more. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but he could feel it. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. Derek had always believed that money and power could get him anything. But now, for the first time, he realized that respect couldn't be bought. It had to be earned. And Jessica had just taken the first step toward making him do exactly that. The room was still, everyone waiting for Derek's next move. But before he could say anything more, Jessica turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the middle of the room, the stain on his pants a constant reminder of what had just happened. As she walked, Jessica's mind was already moving to the next step. She had made her point, and she had done it with grace. But this wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Derek Weston had no idea what was about to come his way. And as the night went on, the whispers about what had happened spread through the restaurant, the story already taking on a life of its own. But the most important part of the story was yet to come. Derek had no idea that this small act of defiance was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change both of their lives forever. I'm sure Derek didn't expect the evening to unfold like this. As the night dragged on, the whispers about what had just happened began to ripple through the restaurant. The other patrons, those who were accustomed to the unspoken rules of power and privilege, were stunned into silence. Derek, the man who had always been in control, now found himself humiliated, standing in the center of a storm he never saw coming. His face was flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, and it made him uncomfortable in a way he had never experienced before. He had lost his grip, not just on his coffee, but on the situation. The humiliation still stung. He looked at his expensive suit, now ruined by the spilled coffee. But it wasn't just the stain that bothered him. It was the feeling of being powerless, something he wasn't used to. Jessica, the waitress, had done something unexpected, something he wasn't prepared for. He had mocked her, thinking she was just another servant in the background, someone to dismiss. But she had turned the tables on him. She had shown him that the power dynamic was not as simple as he thought. As Derek stood there, wrestling with his emotions, he couldn't help but wonder about her. Who was she really? What made her act the way she did? He had never met anyone like her before. Most people would have apologized by now, especially after such a public mistake. But not Jessica. She wasn't afraid. And that intrigued him. Jessica's mind, on the other hand, was already far away from the scene that had unfolded. She had made her point. It wasn't just about the coffee. It was about standing up for herself, for her dignity. In a world that often overlooked people like her, this was her way of asserting her worth. The fact that it had rattled Derek was just the cherry on top. She knew that men like him rarely saw people like her, people who worked in the background, as individuals. To him, she was just a cog in the machine, another face in the crowd. But tonight, she had made sure he knew that she wasn't invisible. And it felt good. However, Jessica also knew that her actions would have consequences. In this world, there were always repercussions for stepping out of line, for upsetting the status quo. But she wasn't scared. She had been fighting battles all her life, and this was just another one. She wasn't going to back down now. Later that night, as she finished her shift and was about to clock out, she saw Derek again. This time, he wasn't surrounded by investors or colleagues. He was standing alone by the coat check, looking lost, as if the weight of the evening had finally sunk in. His usual confident air was gone. He was just a man now, trying to figure out what had happened to him. Jessica felt a flicker of something inside her. She didn't feel sorry for him, not at all. But she couldn't ignore the change she saw in him. The arrogance he wore like a suit had melted away, and in its place was a vulnerability that made him seem human. Derek caught her gaze. There was no mocking smile this time. He just looked at her, searching her face. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to say. Jessica met his gaze calmly, her expression unreadable. "You all right?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an offer of sympathy. It was just a question. Derek opened his mouth as if to say something, then stopped. He had never expected this. He had never expected her to speak to him like this, without the usual servility or fear. And for the first time, it made him question everything he thought he knew about people like her. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice low. "You didn't have to do that." Jessica's lips curled into a small smile, but it wasn't one of triumph. It was just a quiet acknowledgement of the fact that she had done what was necessary. "Sometimes, people need to be reminded of who they really are," she said. Derek was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. He didn't know how to respond. He had spent his life building an empire based on control, manipulation, and power. But now, here he was, standing before someone who had flipped the script. He had underestimated her, and that was a mistake he couldn't take back. As Jessica turned to leave, she paused and looked back at him one last time. "You'll figure it out," she said, her voice almost kind. And with that, she walked out the door, leaving Derek Weston standing there, alone, his world a little less certain than it had been just a few hours ago. The next day, Derek Weston couldn't shake the events from the night before. He woke up early, as he always did, but today felt different. There was an uncomfortable weight on his chest, a feeling he wasn't used to. He sat in his massive New York apartment. The city's skyline sprawled out before him, but for the first time, it didn't bring him comfort. His gaze kept drifting back to the memory of Jessica, the waitress, and how she had turned everything upside down with just a small, deliberate act. He had always prided himself on his ability to control situations, but last night had been a reminder that not everything could be controlled. And certainly not people. The coffee stain on his suit, still faintly visible despite the dry cleaning, seemed to mock him every time he looked at it. It was more than just a ruined outfit. It was a symbol of his arrogance. How could he have been so blind to think he could treat people like that and get away with it? After all, he had made a career out of taking what he wanted, using his wealth and power to force others to bend to his will. But Jessica didn't bend. She stood tall, unafraid, and with dignity. Derek's mind wandered to their brief exchange after the coffee incident. "You'll figure it out," she had said before walking away. It wasn't a threat, but a statement of fact. She wasn't concerned about him. She didn't care if he figured things out or not. She had already moved on. That thought struck him hard. He had expected an apology, or at least a hint of regret, but instead, Jessica had given him nothing but the truth, a truth he wasn't ready to face. Derek knew that he needed to find a way to regain some of the power he had lost. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone in a position like hers. And yet, despite the humiliation, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of respect for her. It troubled him. He didn't know why, but there was something about Jessica that kept him up at night, something deeper than her boldness. What was it? What was she hiding behind those calm eyes? What made her so different? He found himself thinking about her more than he should have. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but his mind kept returning to Jessica. He found himself researching her, anything he could find. She wasn't just a waitress. She had an impressive background, far more than what he had assumed. She had gone to college, worked hard to make ends meet, and even had a dream of writing. She had put in the work, the hours, the effort, something Derek had taken for granted in his own life. He knew, then, that he had to make things right. Not because he owed her an apology, not because he felt bad for what he had done, but because she had made him realize something he hadn't noticed before. His life, his empire, his wealth, it all meant nothing without respect, without true connection. And Jessica had forced him to see that. That evening, Derek found himself back at the same restaurant. It was a place he had often frequented, but this time, it felt different. He didn't want to go there, but he knew he had to. He needed to find her. Jessica. He wasn't sure how he would approach her, what he would say, but he knew that he couldn't let things in the way they had. As he walked into the restaurant, his heart was pounding. The usual warmth and elegance of the place seemed to mock him now. He approached the hostess and asked for Jessica. The hostess raised an eyebrow, but nodded. She's here. I'll let her know you're waiting. A few moments later, Jessica appeared, looking as composed as ever. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, they just stood there, silent. Derek wasn't sure what to say. I didn't expect to see you here, she said, her voice calm, as if this was just another day. I needed to talk to you, Derek replied, his voice more uncertain than he had intended. About what happened? Jessica didn't respond right away. She just studied him, waiting. Derek felt vulnerable under her gaze. He wasn't used to this. I was wrong, he said finally, the words coming out more difficult than he thought. I treated you poorly. I was rude, and I can't take that back. Jessica didn't look away. Her eyes were steady, not judgmental, but searching. She crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the counter. And why are you telling me this? She asked, her tone neither dismissive nor approving. Derek was caught off guard. He hadn't expected her to be so composed. Because I've realized something. You were right. I need to learn how to respect people, not because of who they are or what they do, but because they're human. And I need to change that. Jessica took a long pause, studying him, before speaking. I don't need an apology from you. I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. And for my dignity. Derek nodded slowly. The weight of her words sank in. She wasn't looking for validation. She wasn't looking for anything from him. She had already found her own strength. He realized then that what he needed wasn't her forgiveness, but to understand what it meant to truly respect someone. As he stood there, silently, he knew that this encounter, this moment, would stay with him forever. The room felt different now. It wasn't just about a power struggle between them anymore. It was about something far more important. And Derek Weston was finally beginning to see it. As Derek stood there, the weight of his words still hanging in the air, Jessica didn't immediately respond. For a long moment, there was only silence between them, the hum of the restaurant in the background seeming miles away. Derek had never been one to apologize. In fact, he had spent his entire life convincing himself that admitting fault was a sign of weakness. But here, in front of Jessica, something had shifted. Something he couldn't ignore. He had realized that his wealth, his status, his power meant nothing if he couldn't show the most basic form of respect to another person. And Jessica had made him see that. She wasn't looking for his apology, but in that silence, Derek understood that she wasn't the one who needed to be convinced. He was. He needed to prove to himself that he could be better, that he could be more than the arrogant CEO he had been. Finally, Jessica spoke, her voice as calm and steady as ever. You've got a lot to learn, Derek, she said simply. Derek nodded, feeling the sting of her words, but they were the truth. For the first time in his life, he wasn't bothered by being called out. In fact, it felt freeing. He had lived his life thinking he had all the answers, but now he was facing the uncomfortable reality that he had been wrong about so much. I know, he replied quietly, and I want to learn. Jessica studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. She could sense the sincerity in his words, but she also knew that action spoke louder than words. It's going to take more than just saying the right things, she said. You have to show it. Derek took a deep breath. He wasn't sure how he was going to prove it, but he was willing to try. He had been given a chance to change, and he wasn't going to waste it. I'm ready, he said, his voice steady. What do I need to do? Jessica smiled faintly, her eyes softening just a little. It's not about grand gestures, she said. It's about being consistent, being present, listening, respecting people no matter who they are or where they come from. Derek's mind raced as he took in her words. For so long, he had viewed the world through the lens of profit and power, but Jessica had shown him a different perspective. It wasn't about making deals or showing off his wealth. It was about understanding people, truly seeing them for who they were, not just as tools for his own gain. I'll do it, he promised. Jessica didn't say anything at first, simply watching him with a quiet intensity. She had seen too many people make promises only to break them when things got hard. She had no illusions about what it would take for Derek to change. But in that moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was ready. Let's see what happens, she said softly, turning to leave. Derek watched her go, a sense of determination flooding him. He wasn't sure how long it would take to change, or if he even could. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stop trying. As the weeks went by, Derek's behavior began to shift. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't perfect, but he made an effort every single day. He started paying attention to the people around him, his employees, his colleagues, the people he had once dismissed as insignificant. He took time to listen to their ideas, to respect their opinions, even if they weren't in a position of power. He began to see the world in a different light. Jessica's influence on him had started a transformation that was far from easy, but it was real. He knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the journey. One day, a few months later, Derek found himself back at the restaurant. It was late, and the dinner rush was over, but he still felt a pull to come here, to this place that had started it all. As he entered, he saw Jessica, just finishing up her shift. She was standing by the door, gathering her things, and as their eyes met, Derek felt a rush of gratitude. He walked up to her, not sure what to say, but knowing he had to thank her for everything she had done. Jessica, he said, his voice earnest, I just want to say thank you. For everything. You changed my life. Jessica raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting this. She looked at him for a moment, assessing him, before speaking. I didn't change your life, she said, her tone a little amused. You changed your own life. I just gave you a little nudge. Derek smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't known in years. Well, I'm grateful for that nudge, he said, and I'm going to make sure I don't waste it. Jessica gave him a small, approving nod. Just remember, it's about consistency, she reminded him. One step at a time. Derek nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't perfect, and he knew he never would be. But that was okay. He was learning. He was growing. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to control everything around him. Instead, he was trying to understand. I will, he promised, as Jessica turned to leave. And as he stood there, watching her walk out the door, Derek Weston knew that the real power wasn't in money, or status, or control. It was in respect. And that was something he was finally ready to give. Months passed, and Derek continued his journey of change. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when old habits crept back in, but Derek found himself more focused than ever on the path he had set for himself. Each day, he took steps to improve not just his business, but his relationships, both personal and professional. He learned to listen, to respect, and to see people for who they truly were, not as commodities or tools to be used for his own benefit, but as individuals with their own stories, struggles, and dreams. His transformation didn't go unnoticed. In the office, his employees began to respond to him differently. There was a new atmosphere in the company. People were more willing to share their ideas, to speak up in meetings, to offer solutions. Derek had become the kind of leader who didn't just dictate orders. He sought input, asked questions, and genuinely cared about the opinions of the people who worked for him. It was a refreshing change. But even with all the progress he had made, there was still something missing. One evening, Derek sat in his office late, reflecting on how far he had come. The silence in the room was calming, but it also felt empty. He thought about Jessica. In the weeks since their last encounter, he hadn't seen her again. The memory of their conversation still lingered, and Derek realized that he hadn't fully expressed his gratitude to her. She had been the catalyst for his transformation, and yet, he hadn't taken the time to thank her properly. He had meant to reach out, but his life had been a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and changes. Now, as he sat in the quiet of his office, he knew it was time to find her. He had to do more than just thank her. He had to show her the person he had become. Derek reached for his phone and quickly sent a message to the restaurant where she worked. He didn't know if she would even be there, but he had to try. A few minutes later, he received a response. She was working the evening shift. Derek felt a sense of relief wash over him. He got up, changed into something more casual, and headed out. As he walked into the restaurant, the familiar smell of freshly prepared food and the low hum of conversation filled the air. It felt like he had walked into a different world, one where power and wealth didn't matter. It was a place where people came together to share a meal, to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. Derek spotted Jessica almost immediately. She was moving between tables, her movements graceful and efficient, but there was something in the way she carried herself that made her stand out. It wasn't her uniform or the fact that she was busy. It was her quiet confidence. Derek walked over to her. She saw him coming and didn't look surprised. "Derek," she said, her voice neutral, but with a hint of curiosity. "What brings you here?" He smiled, feeling a bit nervous but determined. "I came to see you," he said. "I owe you an apology. I didn't do it properly last time. I want to thank you, Jessica. You changed my life." She raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "Changed your life?" she asked, clearly skeptical. "I'm not looking for some big apology or grand gesture. That's not what I need." Derek nodded, understanding. "I know. It's not about that. It's about me finally getting it. About respecting people for who they are, not just what they can do for me. And that's something I learned from you." Jessica paused, then let out a soft sigh. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, Derek," she said, her voice steady. "I just showed you something that you had to see for yourself. You've been in your world, living by your rules for so long. You never stopped to consider how others might feel." Derek looked down for a moment, reflecting on her words. "You're right. I thought I had everything figured out, but I didn't understand what really mattered." Jessica's eyes softened a little, and she gave him a small nod. "It's not about being perfect," she said. "It's about growth. It's about taking responsibility for your actions and trying to be better every day. And that's what you're doing. I can see that." Derek felt a warmth spread through him, hearing her words of encouragement. "Thank you," he said again, this time more genuinely. "I want to do more than just change myself. I want to make a real impact. I want to give back." Jessica looked at him thoughtfully, her gaze lingering for a moment. "Well," she said finally, "you're on the right track. Just keep going. And remember, it's the little things that make the biggest difference." Derek nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't about trying to prove himself to others anymore. It was about living with integrity, staying true to the lessons he had learned, and treating people with the respect they deserved. As he left the restaurant that evening, Derek knew that he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he was excited about the journey ahead. And as for Jessica, he knew that their paths had crossed for a reason. She had shown him a different way to live, and for that, he would always be grateful. The weeks that followed were a period of reflection and growth for Derek. He continued to change, but the journey was far from simple. Every day presented a new challenge, and he was constantly testing the boundaries of his new approach to life and leadership. But one thing was clear: he was committed to this transformation. It wasn't just a shift in how he interacted with his employees or how he led his company. It was a complete rethinking of what it meant to truly be a man of integrity. One evening, as Derek was walking through his office, heading to a meeting, he ran into one of his senior executives, Ryan, who had been with him for years. Ryan had always been loyal, but Derek noticed something different in his colleague's demeanor, something wary, almost guarded. "Hey Ryan, how's everything going?" Derek asked, trying to maintain the friendly tone he had worked so hard to cultivate. Ryan hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's fine, Derek. Everything's fine." Derek noticed the hesitation and raised an eyebrow. "What's on your mind? You're not usually this reserved." Ryan shifted uncomfortably, then sighed. "It's just, well, things are different around here, and I'm not sure how to take it." Derek felt a pang of concern. "Different how?" Ryan glanced around the office, as if making sure no one else was listening. "The changes. The way you're approaching things. It's a little, unexpected. You've been more human, I guess. More open with everyone." Derek frowned, wondering where this conversation was headed. "And that's a bad thing?" Ryan shook his head quickly, trying to clarify. No, it's not bad. It's just unfamiliar. We're used to you being the guy who makes the tough decisions, who tells us what to do. But now, it feels like you're actually listening to us. It's throwing everyone off a bit. Derek took a deep breath. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. Changing the culture of a company, changing how people viewed him, it wasn't going to happen overnight. Look, Ryan, Derek said, leaning against his desk. I've realized that being a leader isn't just about making decisions from a position of power. It's about being there for people, hearing them out, and making decisions that actually take their thoughts and feelings into account. That's the only way this company is going to move forward. And it starts with me. Ryan seemed to consider this for a moment. I get that, he said, his voice softer. I guess I'm not sure how to follow a leader who isn't always the one calling the shots. Derek smiled, knowing this was the core issue. He was no longer the type of leader who gave orders and expected blind obedience. He was learning to lead through collaboration and mutual respect, and that was a major shift. I'm still making the decisions, Derek said, his tone firm but kind. But I'm involving you in those decisions now. We're all in this together, and I can't do it alone. And honestly, I don't want to. Ryan seemed to relax a little, and Derek could see a small shift in his attitude. I guess I'm still getting used to this, Ryan admitted. But I trust you, Derek. I'm just not sure how everyone else feels about it. Derek nodded, understanding the hesitation. It was going to take time. Changing a company's culture wasn't an instant process. It was something that had to happen organically, through consistent action and communication. I get it, Derek said. It's going to take time. But I'm in this for the long haul, and I need you to be with me on it. Ryan nodded, a more genuine smile forming on his face. You've got it, Derek. We'll figure it out together. As they continued their conversation, Derek realized that this was exactly what he needed. Open, honest conversations with the people around him. He wasn't going to change the world overnight, but he was making progress. And that was enough. Later that evening, Derek sat in his office, reflecting on the conversation with Ryan. He had made a lot of changes, but he knew there was still so much work to be done. But that was the thing about change. It wasn't something you could achieve in one big move. It was a series of small steps, each one building on the last. He thought about Jessica, about how she had forced him to confront his flaws and weaknesses. Without her, he wouldn't have had the courage to make these changes. She had given him the nudge he needed, but now it was up to him to keep moving forward. He thought about how far he had come since the night of the coffee spill. He wasn't the same man anymore. He had learned to value respect over control, connection over manipulation, and kindness over power. He was still a work in progress, but for the first time, he was okay with that. Derek knew he had a long way to go, but as he sat there, surrounded by the tools of his empire, he realized that the most important change had already taken place. He had changed, and that, more than anything, was the beginning of something new. As the months went by, Derek continued to build on the foundation he had set for himself. The changes he had made in his company were starting to show. Employee morale was higher, there was more collaboration between departments, and Derek's leadership style was gaining recognition from those around him. But despite the outward success, Derek knew that the real transformation was happening inside him. He wasn't perfect, and there were days when old habits resurfaced, when the pressure of the corporate world made him want to revert back to his old ways. But he was learning, and each time he stumbled, he picked himself up and kept moving forward. One afternoon, Derek was having lunch at the restaurant where he had first met Jessica. He had become a regular there, not just because of the food, but because it was a place that reminded him of how far he had come. As he sat at his usual table, he noticed someone walking towards him out of the corner of his eye. It was Jessica. She had always been graceful, but today, there was something different about her. She seemed more relaxed, more confident, and her smile was genuine. When she saw him, her face lit up with that familiar, quiet strength. "Derek," she said, her voice warm. "I didn't expect to see you here today." Derek smiled back, feeling a sense of comfort at her presence. "I could say the same about you," he replied. "I've come to realize that this place isn't just about the food. It's where everything started for me." Jessica raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "And what's that?" Derek leaned back in his chair, the weight of his words sinking in. "This is where I started changing. This is where I learned that being a leader isn't just about calling the shots, it's about respect. And I have you to thank for that." Jessica stood there for a moment, processing his words. She hadn't expected such a candid admission from him, but there was something different about Derek now. He wasn't hiding behind his usual bravado. He was being real. "You've come a long way," she said finally, her tone soft. "But you know, the real test isn't what happens in the office or the boardroom. It's what happens when you walk out those doors and into the world. It's the little moments, the everyday decisions." Derek nodded, the weight of her words hitting him harder than anything else. It was one thing to change at work, but it was another thing entirely to live that change in every aspect of life. "I know," he said quietly, "and I've still got a long way to go." Jessica smiled at him, a smile that seemed to carry both understanding and encouragement. "Just keep going," she said, "one step at a time." Derek watched as she turned to leave, a sense of peace settling over him. He wasn't in this journey alone anymore. He had learned that the world wasn't about controlling every aspect of his life, but about finding balance and learning from the people around him. As he sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, he realized that he wasn't the same person who had walked into that restaurant all those months ago. He had changed in ways he never thought possible. And it was all because of a single moment. A moment when Jessica had made him see the truth about himself. Later that week, Derek decided to do something he had never done before. He called a company-wide meeting. It was time to do more than just talk about change. It was time to show the people who worked for him that he was serious about making a lasting impact. When the meeting began, Derek stood at the front of the room, looking out at the faces of the people who had once seen him as nothing more than a powerful CEO. Now, they were looking at him with respect, curiosity, and even admiration. "I want to start this meeting by saying thank you," Derek began. "Thank you for believing in the direction we're heading. But I also want to be clear, this company isn't just about profits or growth. It's about the people who make it all happen. And that means respecting every individual, regardless of their role. We all contribute to the success of this company, and it's time we start acting like it." The room was silent for a moment, but Derek could see the shift in the energy. People were listening. They were hearing him in a way they hadn't before. He could feel the power of his words taking hold, not just in the room, but in himself. This wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration of his commitment to change. As the meeting continued, Derek talked about the importance of teamwork, communication, and building an inclusive environment where everyone's voice mattered. He shared his vision for the company's future, one that was grounded in values of integrity, empathy, and respect. By the end of the meeting, Derek felt a sense of accomplishment. He had said what needed to be said, but more importantly, he had taken another step toward becoming the leader he had always wanted to be. Walking out of the meeting, he couldn't help but think about how far he had come. From the arrogant CEO who thought he had all the answers, to the man standing before his employees, trying to lead with humility and respect. Derek Weston had changed, and while the road ahead was still long, he was ready to face whatever came next. As he left the office that day, his phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. "One step at a time," it read. He smiled to himself, knowing she was right. It wasn't about the destination, it was about the journey, and Derek was finally on the right path. It had been a year since Derek had started his journey of change, and although the road had been long, he could finally see the person he had become. The once arrogant, control-obsessed CEO was now a leader who valued integrity, empathy, and respect. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when Derek struggled, but the man who walked into that restaurant for the first time, ready to dismiss people like Jessica, was no longer the same man standing here today. Derek sat in his office, reflecting on the transformation he had undergone. The company had grown in more ways than one, and the culture he had worked so hard to reshape was flourishing. Employees were more engaged, productivity had increased, and there was a renewed sense of purpose among the team. But the real success was personal. He had learned that true leadership wasn't about power. It was about connecting with people, understanding their needs, and lifting them up. As Derek looked out of his office window, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Jessica. "One step at a time, right?" Derek smiled. Her words had stuck with him, and they had become the foundation of his journey. He had come to realize that it wasn't just about the big moments of change. It was the small, everyday actions that mattered most. Those were the moments that truly defined who he was. He thought back to the night they had met, to the coffee spill that had turned his world upside down. At the time, he had thought he was in control, but that small act of defiance had shown him the truth. That real power came from within, and that respect couldn't be demanded, only earned. Derek picked up the phone and typed out a quick response to Jessica. "Thank you for everything. I'm still learning, but I'm getting there." He hit send and leaned back in his chair. Over the past year, he had learned more than he ever thought possible. He had learned that it was okay to be vulnerable, to admit when he didn't have all the answers, and to trust others to help guide him. He had learned to lead with humility, and in doing so, he had earned the respect of his employees and peers. But most importantly, he had learned that the journey of change didn't end. It was a continuous process, one that required constant self-reflection, growth, and an unwavering commitment to doing the right thing. Derek knew that there would be more challenges ahead. There would be moments when he would slip, when he would be tempted to revert to old habits. But he was ready for it. He had the tools he needed now, and he had a team that believed in him. As Derek stood up from his desk and walked out of his office, he felt a sense of pride that he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't perfect, but he was better, and that, he realized, was enough. He made his way down the hall and entered the conference room where his team was gathered for a meeting. As he walked in, there was a brief silence, but then, one by one, his team members nodded at him, their expressions warm and respectful. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to Derek. He had worked hard to earn their trust, and now, he had it. "Let's get started," Derek said, his voice steady. He wasn't just the CEO anymore. He was a leader, someone who had earned his place through hard work, humility, and respect. As the meeting began, Derek listened intently to his team's ideas, offering his input when necessary, but always encouraging open dialogue. The room was full of collaboration, and Derek realized that this was what he had always wanted. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about creating an environment where everyone could contribute and work together toward a common goal. Later that evening, as Derek drove home, he thought about the future. There were still many things to accomplish, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't just building a company. He was building a legacy of respect, empathy, and leadership that would outlast him. And as he pulled into his driveway, Derek knew that the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning.